Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast, Nuclear Medicine, What Does the Future Hold for Canada? My name is Andre Picard. I'm the health columnist at the Globe and Mail, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the land on which the Globe and Mail is situated is on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit Nation. I'd urge everyone who's joined us from across Canada to take a moment to acknowledge the territory on which they're situated, whether it's treaty land or unceded territory, and reflect a bit on the role we can all play individually and collectively in reconciliation. Now, after a couple of years of virtual events, we've worked out most of the bugs. But if you need technical help, please click on the help desk icon. It's on the bottom of your screen. Hopefully we won't need to use that today. If you have a question for the speakers, please use the Q&A, the question and answer box. It's on the right, and we'll make every effort to incorporate those into our discussion. And please don't wait until the last 30 seconds of the event to ask your question. Type them in when they pop into your head, and I'll follow along. I'll keep them in mind for later in the conversation. Now, today we're talking about nuclear medicine and how advances in the technology are opening up new opportunities to diagnose and treat illnesses such as cancer, and of course, the economic opportunities that come from that. I have a personal interest in this story. I'm sure many other people in the audience do as well. My grandfather was one of the first people in the world treated for cancer with cobalt-60 radiation therapy in the 1950s. Now, we've come a long way with Canadian innovation, other life-saving Canadian innovation since that so-called cobalt bomb early on. And today we can't really talk about nuclear medicine without talking about isotopes, and that's going to be the focus of much of our discussion today. Canada's been a leader in this field for decades. We use isotopes for diagnostics and increasingly for treatment, and we'll talk a bit about how that works. And we'll hear about some of the exciting new advances in a moment from our guests. But before I start, I want to mention that today's webcast is supported by the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council and Bruce Power, and we thank them for doing that so we can have this discussion. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists, and I'm not going to do justice to their bios. I'm just going to give them Twitter-length introductions so we can spend most of our time talking. First of all, I'll introduce Maya Ingram. She's Program Manager for Isotopes and Business Development with Bruce Power, which is located in Port Elgin, Ontario. Next, Catherine Hayashi, President and CEO of Triumph Innovations in beautiful Vancouver, up near the UBC campus. Welcome, Catherine. Also joining us is Karen Stevenson. She's the Director of Research Platforms with McMaster University in Hamilton. Welcome to today's panel. And finally, last but not least, we have Sten Meyerhog. He's a radiation oncologist and clinical investigator with the Odette Cancer Center at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have a really great topic and some great guests, so I want to wade right into the questions. And because we have a mixed audience, we have some experts here, we have some lay people. I want to start with some really basic questions to lay the groundwork for our discussion. Catherine, maybe I'd start with you. Triumph has been supplying medical isotopes in Canada for more than 40 years. Can you just give us a sense of what these things are and what they're used for, really generally?
Sure. So what isotopes are really species of chemical elements that you see on the periodic table. They're produced through the natural decay of atoms, and we use them to treat and image disease. So they can be orally injected, they can be, they can be taken orally, they can be injected, they can be inhaled, and many of us have had them in various medical procedures so that you can light up areas of disease or change in your body.
Yeah, so we see that stuff if you have like a heart stress test, for example, you've had isotopes.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're fairly commonly used. Maybe I'll jump Maya from Bruce Power. We think of Bruce Power as producing electricity, but you do this with nuclear reactors, and those produce isotopes as well. Can you give us a sense of how that works? Is this a byproduct? Is it garbage that we've found a use for? What is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in nuclear energy, we're producing extra neutrons. And to be able to produce the isotopes that are used in the various applications, they need to accept a different or an extra neutron. So what we're doing is essentially providing that irradiation source. So we're adding a neutron to the source material so that we are able to create those usable medical isotopes and create a different product. So we would start with, for example, in lutetium-177, we would start with ytterbium-176. We would put that into our reactors. It would accept a neutron and decay to lutetium-177.
And I don't know if you know the history, but how did someone dream this up that, hey, we might as well shoot these things into people's bodies? What's the thinking there?
It's a great question, and I don't have a medical science background, so I don't know if anyone on the call wants to jump in on that, Karen or Catherine or Sten.
Anybody? I just threw that one in off the top of my head about the history, but I wondered why anyone had that idea in the first place.
I don't know who wants to jump in on there. Okay, I can jump in and say, I think there's a long history of nuclear medicine and different radiation oncology. It actually started as far back even as Mary Curie in looking at radium and treating tumors and finding different ways to treat them externally with external beam therapy in the same way that you kind of look at cobalt. So there's a long history for nuclear medicine. It's even longer than nuclear energy, really.
Yeah, I guess everything goes back to Marie Curie when we go to science. So, okay, sorry, I tricked you. I surprised you with that question. It just popped into my mind. I'll come back to you in a second, Karen, but I want to ask Sten, because you're a radiation oncologist, a clinician. Can you give us a better idea? We heard a little bit about how isotopes are used, like in heart stress tests, but how do you use them for diagnostics and treatment? Is it a simple procedure?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So, speaking from an oncology lens, I think we'd be remiss to say that the majority of radioisotopes be used in the initial diagnostic part. And so really what we're trying to understand with these specific isotopes is, where is cancer? Where is it and what is it doing? And then based upon that information, we may alter treatment plans or have different therapies dependent on what we're seeing on these scans. Now, this is now evolving through cancer to the point where we can use these isotopes to assess response. And so we put patients on therapy, and then we utilize this imaging to help better understand how well they're responding to current therapy and potentially continuing on or changing treatment. And I think what's very exciting is really the combination of nuclear science and biology to this new, we call theragnostic paradigm, where what we are doing is using the biology of specific cell markers to deliver radioisotopes directly to the cancer. And so it's a combination of imaging and then directed therapy, which we're hoping is going to provide more precise therapy for patients.
So with if we look at the diagnostics, essentially it lights up something and then you can see where the cancer is. That a too simple of an explanation?
Yeah, there's different ways that we can use the isotopes for diagnostics, but I think that's a great way of looking at it, that the majority we're looking at the uptake of active cells. And so by doing that, we're able to identify where in the body and sometimes how these cells are behaving.
Okay, great. And Karen, I'll come back to you without a trick question this time. You work at McMaster, which does everything from basic research to commercialization of these products. Can you give us a sense of what has you excited these days? Because as we mentioned, Canada's been a leader in this for a long time. What has you excited these days?
I think what's really exciting about the field right now in general is that we're really seeing a renaissance. So if you were to go back 10 years ago, most people were focused only on diagnostic nuclear medicine. But as we've had these new emerging radiotherapies, it's really shifting and pushing us into areas and really helping meet cancer patients of unmet needs. So it's, I think the most exciting part is we're seeing this emergence of radiotherapy and the theragnostics, what Sten was talking about. Sorry, go ahead. One thing that's interesting is that our first one is that it's going to become a first-line therapy. So when radiotherapies become the go-to for your first-line cancer treatment, It also means that we need more supply and we need greater supply chain of medical isotopes. One thing that we do really well here in Canada is our infrastructure lends itself well to supporting the full breadth of the supply isotope chain on many different isotopes, from actinium, which you'll hear Catherine probably talk about, to lutetium, which will come from Bruce Power, and our research reactor at McMaster, which provides a whole breadth of different isotopes and those early stage research that allows that translational piece. So we do really well in Canada in supporting the global market, as well as helping support these emergence and trials. And what I think that means for Canadians is that we have the opportunity to bring these clinical trials, these new treatments to Canadians.
Okay, and we'll talk about the supply chain in more detail because it is an important component of this. Yeah. But I want to stick to the products themselves. And you mentioned Catherine could talk to us maybe about actinium-225. This is an exciting thing. Talk to us a little bit about that, practically how it works and why this is an exciting product.
I wonder if we could show the images. I think the image is really illustrative of what the opportunity is. And so this is a slide of a patient scan. And so this is the same patient in each of the scans. And the leftmost image, you see a patient that has advanced metastasized prostate cancer. And so that means that the prostate cancer has spread from the prostate into the bone. So you can see the black spots, and that indicates cancer in the hips, in the spine, in the rib cage, the shoulders. Typically, a patient like this would have gone through radiotherapy and failed, gone through chemotherapy and failed, and is really looking at probably 3 to 6 months left to live. That image is from December 2014. You can see the same patient after 3 treatments with actinium-225 that is linked with something called PSMA, and this is something that targets specifically to prostate cancer. So prostate-specific membrane antigen is what PSMA stands for. And so what happens is it delivers the actinium isotope directly to cancer cells. And basically, the actinium arrives at the cell and then destroys within a few cell widths whatever is around it. And so it's very effective at eradicating cancer, but maintaining very little damage to other tissues. And so you see that patient in July 2015. You can see much of the cancer has been resolved. And then this patient was given one more treatment. And so by September 2015, you can see that the PSA levels have dropped down to a remission level, which is a remarkable and exciting result. Certainly, will it work for everyone? No, but it's an important new tool that is being developed for cancer oncologists around the world. One of the main problems with actinium-225 is that it's a very rare isotope, and in fact, we have some local filmmakers produced a video, and they've called it the rarest drug on earth, and that was sort of their take on it. It's rarestdrug.com if you want to see it, but the current supply is only enough for a few thousand patients in the world, and many of us all around the world are working on ways to increase that supply. At Triumph, we have the world's largest cyclotron of its kind with a proton beam. So we have a 500 million electron volt cyclotron. It's 18 meters across. We have public tours. You're very welcome to come see it for yourself. But because we have this incredible infrastructure, as Karen kind of talked about, these are infrastructure pieces with cyclotrons and reactors in Canada that we have invested in over the past decades. And now to be able to leverage those infrastructure pieces into these new, exciting, innovative imaging agents, therapy agents is really exciting for us and I think offering new hope. So we'll be able to go from doses for a few thousand patients to tens of thousands of patients. And I think that is really when you're starting to make an impact on people's lives in Canada and around the world.
And if we could stick with actinium-225 for a moment, Sten, as a clinician, is it fair from what I heard Catherine say, this is kind of a last-ditch treatment, right? It's not for everyone, it's rare. You go through a whole bunch of other stages first. Is that a fair assessment?
So I would say at this point in time, yes. But what's really interesting is that we are now trying to understand where these isotopes are fitting at different stages of the patient's journey through cancer. And so in fact, what we're doing right now at Sunnybrook is we're part of an ongoing clinical trial looking at therapy for neuroendocrine tumors for patients upfront, so never been treated beforehand. And are these therapies appropriate at that time point? Because that's always been a big question when we're using these isotopes, is at what point? Should it be right away? Should we wait until there's been other therapies? And so that's where the research is going. And I think, again, that's a really exciting component of this, is trying to understand where it fits in the patient's cancer journey.
Yeah, I guess it's finding the right time to use them, especially if they're in short supply, is a big challenge. Karen, I'm not an expert in this field, but I've seen some other exciting talk about things like lutetium-177. Can you give us a sense of that one, how that's different, why that's promising?
So lutetium-177 is similar to actinium in that they're both used for radiotherapy. They're actually both used on similar drugs often. Lutetium-177 is a beta emitter, and actinium is an alpha emitter. So they just behave a little differently in the body. They do slightly different damage, but the intent is both to eradicate the cancer. So you can use them similarly, but on the same molecules, and then you perform different clinical trials to look at their effectiveness. So lutetium-177 is currently, I would say, the most used radiotherapy isotope. It is certainly growing the fastest because it is a little bit easier to produce. It's sort of less rare in production methods than actinium-225 right now, and it will be interesting to see who wins the race when there's more actinium available. But I think that as a researcher, what's interesting is having lutetium and actinium available allows us to ask these really important clinical questions. So I think it is really good and important for us to participate in shoring up that supply and making it available. And one of the things Sten said is super intriguing to me, because where it fits in the clinical paradigm is really a great question, because we have to meet the supply. If we're going to be a first-line therapy, there's just far more patients to treat. So we have to be able to meet that supply, and that really is a space where Canada shines.
Great. And while I have you, we've talking about these exciting new ones, but we can't forget that there's a lot of these products that have been used for a long time for a lot of people. Can you talk about something that many people would maybe have experienced, but they don't know what it is? Technetium, the heart stress test drug, for example, how does that work?
Sure. So technetium is the backbone of nuclear medicine. So if you go to nuclear medicine and have a test, you're probably having a bone scan. That's going to be technetium MDP, or you're going to have a heart stress, which is a technetium compound as well, or a radiopharmaceutical. And so it has a 6-hour half-life. So the nice thing about diagnostic medical isotopes is they're in and out fairly quickly. So we have had patients show up at the reactor, interestingly, for a tour, and they've forgotten that they've been injected with a stress test isotope, and they light up every detector that we have. So it's really an interesting thing that people aren't really aware of, is when you go and have those tests, that you are being injected with medical isotopes and that they're safe, and we monitor and we make sure everything is done appropriately. So another one that you'll hear often in cancer oncology is fluorodeoxyglucose, which is labeled with F18, and that has a 2-hour half-life, and that's really used predominantly in oncology and staging different cancers, because it's essentially radioactive sugar. So when you inject that into the body, tumors are growing rapidly, so they need lots of energy. So they take that sugar up really quick. And then those are the black dots that you will often see in sort of those images that the oncologist is looking at. Those would be.
And sugar, it sounds like something you can take in your coffee. But most of these drugs are injected, as I understand, but some are oral.
Yes, there is some oral treatment for different radiotherapies, different ones that they're not so common anymore. Most are injected. Most, I would say, are injected. And so that just means that we follow a different safety standard as well at a very high level. So they're produced in what we call good manufacturing.
Now, we mentioned earlier the supply chain. Supply chain is something that's come to dominate all these discussions we have at these business conferences and everything. This is no exception. Isotopes. I guess the big question is, can we keep up the demand for all these exciting new treatments?
Yeah, and I think the answer should be yes. I think to Karen's point, Canada has the infrastructure already. Canada has a huge opportunity to jump in and to support major developments in this area. At Bruce Power right now, we're currently undergoing a major project for installing a new isotope production system. So we currently do produce cobalt-60, and we have done so for decades at the Bruce Power site. But we are implementing this new isotope production system with the intention of commercially producing lutetium-177. So as we are an electricity producer, our reactors are running 24/7. We have a large capacity as it relates to neutrons and energy production. And so it's really a huge capacity that we can be providing in terms of the supply of lutetium-177. Now, the supply chain is not just going to be that reliable supply, that capacity that we can provide to the system. It's going to be all the other steps and all the other partners that are so essential in terms of getting this therapy to the patients. So Karen had spoken about the half-life of some of the diagnostic tools being in the hours. Lutetium-177 has a half-life of just under 7 days. So in terms of when we kind of provide it or pull it out of our reactors and then process it, we have about a 2-week window. So we really need to be working closely with those partners to ensure that when it comes out of our reactor, that we do have those patients lined up and we do have the manufacturers lined up and we have all those steps following us in a very time-sensitive way so that the treatment when it gets to the patient is still medically viable. So it's a really interesting supply chain perspective, really interesting supply chain problem and challenge where Bruce Power has the capacity to produce basically as much quantity as is necessary. We can produce a lot. But when it comes down to it, we really need to be matching up with those patients who need it. So it's really balancing how much we're able to produce at the right time.
Yeah, and people don't always understand this, that it has a short shelf life. You have to use it at the right time.
Completely, yes.
And Catherine, I'm going to ask you that same supply question. Can we produce enough of these products with places like Triumph and Bruce Power?
I think one of the interesting things about production, certainly at Triumph, on our 500 MeV cyclotron or 500 million electron volt cyclotron, one of the reasons that everyone at Triumph is excited, even the researchers, is that the beam at Triumph is powerful enough that it actually goes through all of the science experiments. And then at the very end of the beam line, right before what we call the beam dump is, so it's kind of unused protons or leftover protons, that's where we make the actinium. So it's very complementary to our research efforts. It doesn't mean that we have less beam for the research that we do. A lot of what we do at Triumph is, figuring out what happens when neutron stars collide and looking for dark matter and all these sorts of things. So we can still do all of those experiments and then make actinium at the end, which is very exciting. But yes, supply chain is a major focus for us. So how do we make enough actinium to get into the hands of researchers to allow these treatments to become commercialized, to be widely available? We work on that every day. We're working on new methods to produce it that don't involve our large cyclotron, that could be adapted for smaller cyclotrons. We're working with partners all up and down the chain. So everyone from researchers that are working on kind of the next wave of isotopes, will it be lead, will it be astatine, as well as all of our distribution and processing partners to really get something that turns into a medicine that can be given to patients.
Great. I see, Karen, you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the supply chain challenge is that there's a history there of having medical isotope supply challenges globally. And so I think that in order to continue to build confidence in our physicians and using the different isotopes and the treatment options that are coming, we want to make sure that we have redundancy in our supply. And so we want to make sure that we have multiple avenues, and that involves multiple reactors, multiple different sources in order that are people that are producing it on all levels so that we can create that. The last thing that we want is to have a patient go untreated because we couldn't get the drug. and we couldn't get the supply. So that's the part that I think we want to be very clear on, and Canada plays a big role in that. The other part that I did want to add about supply is that this is also an of economic importance to this industry and to Canada, I think, as well. It plays a big role. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's growing 15% per year and will grow well past, they say 15% per year, well past 2026. So there's huge economic impact and benefits to Canadians here too.
Yeah, and I think I saw a $33 billion industry already, so already quite a big one.
Yeah.
Sten, on the supply chain, we're getting a lot of questions about this. People read the news, obviously. A lot of these products come from the Ukraine. They come from Russia. How is the war, how is this affecting patients?
So I think the short answer would be we're not seeing it right now, that there has been the ability of the other global supply chains to provide. And so from a clinical perspective right now, we're not seeing it, but you're absolutely right that Russia and Ukraine is a large source of medical isotopes. And so I suspect that we are going to be seeing potentially some downstream effects from the war in Ukraine, maybe not immediately, but in the not distant future.
Yeah.
And Maya, when we read about this in sort of the mainstream media, it's always about, oh no, there's a shortage, something happened at Chalk River or whatever. Is that going to be a perpetual issue, or are we getting a handle on that?
I think that Karen really spoke to this really well earlier when she said that like the key here is really redundancy. So Bruce Power has capacity. We have 8 reactors. We're starting with installing on 1 reactor at this point, but we have the ability, we have built a system that's flexible enough to move across to be installed in each of our reactors. And it also does have the flexibility to adjust. So as we see innovation, as we see development within the medical isotope space, we're able to produce different isotopes. But that being said, electricity production happens consistently. We're also going through a major component replacement right now. So we are seeing units go offline currently. So having that redundancy, like in Triumph, leveraging OPG, leveraging the entire infrastructure across Canada as it relates to where Canada has a lot of this existing infrastructure is going to be very important. Yes, I think from a supply chain perspective, Russia is definitely a concern. There are a lot of isotopes coming out of there, and Canada certainly has a really great opportunity to jump in and provide that redundancy, as well as providing the capacity based on the existing infrastructure that they have. I know, Catherine, it sounds like you want to jump in, so feel free.
So I think part of that also is innovation to solve those gaps. So, and of course, innovation isn't overnight, but, for example, when the Chalk River reactor shut down, and we were very worried as a globe about where these imaging isotopes were going to come from, different producers stepped in with different production methods. At Triumph, we developed a whole new way to make technetium using cyclotrons. And so we developed a technology that allows people to make cyclotrons on basic, like tabletop cyclotrons that sit in the basement of a hospital, can produce enough of the isotope for the patients that they need that day. And I think the other piece of it is, again, innovation continues to innovate. And so the technetium shortage didn't really turn into the crisis that people were worried about when the reactor shut down. But our spinoff company, Artemis, has pivoted, and they can use the same technology, the same machine with a different target to make gallium. And gallium is an isotope that is in increasing demand for imaging. It's, so the scan that we showed earlier with the patient, that was actually done with gallium. And so people are looking for gallium supply. And so innovation is a piece of how we're going to fill these gaps in the future as well.
And we have some, I think, some very sophisticated audience members are getting some very technical questions. So I'm going to throw them out there. I don't know what I'm talking about, but maybe I'll try one with Karen to start off with, because I know you have a small reactor at MAC. Someone's asking, could some of the new small modular reactors be used specifically for isotope production?
Oh, that's a great question. And, we've been asked that question a lot. I think there's a lot of different designs of small modular reactors. And so it'll depend on the design and how they're thinking about it. But if you can imagine, one of the things is even the waste that will come out of a reactor and how you imagine those neutrons. It's almost like at Bruce Power, the neutrons are the byproduct, right? Like you're getting them because it's using to make electricity. So if there's a way that somebody cleverly can think of how to use those neutrons in addition with the design of a small modular reactor, then I think the potential is there. However, the intent for SMRs really is to provide electricity for small local communities and to support different industries. So I don't know if they quite mix, but I wouldn't take it off the table. I think innovation and thinking long term is a way to go.
Okay, we'll put it out there as a challenge. Maybe there's some PhD students out there and they can take up that challenge and figure it out. Yeah. I'm going to send another audience question your way, Sten. Somebody's saying there's a lack of PET facilities and radionuclide therapy centers in Canada. How do you feel about expanding access to existing and new therapies if we don't have those facilities?
That is a great question. And it's something that we have been grappling with from both the clinical side and also on the delivery and administrative side about how do we look at the future? So not even just now, but where are we going in Ontario and where are we going in Canada with the use of isotopes? And how are we going to build the capacity to both image and then treat? And a lot of that is going to be centered around location, that we want to ensure that we've got equal access for everybody and to try to do it in a way that requires less travel and less impact on patients' lives. And so, I think it's a wonderful question. Something that we are really grappling with is how do we expand services when we're already looking at wait lists and other issues. So really, it's going to come down to best science in terms of the proper indications for patients, making sure that we are imaging and treating the right people at the right time. And then based upon that, looking at our population-based data to provide our governments with the information needed so that we can properly invest in this area.
And maybe you can just first, again, some people in the audience don't know the technicalities. Why do you need a PET scan for these this kind of treatment?
Yeah, so if we're looking specifically for the radioisotope therapy, and this again goes back to this diagnostic concept that you image the presence of a receptor, and then you use that receptor to deliver energy via a radioactive isotope. And so the two go hand in hand, that you need to have positive PET imaging in order to predict that the radioisotope is going to work as a treatment. And so it is both components which are essential.
Great, and that's how we got those lovely images that we saw shined up earlier. Great. Let's see. I think I'll come back just briefly to Maya, if I could, because someone's asking, what about Pickering closing down? How does that fit into the supply chain equation, if at all?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I know that Darlington is very much focused on extending their capacity as it relates to producing. Karen had mentioned it before, so I know that they're looking at adding technetium to their production capability as well as cobalt. So Pickering closing down, I think, is just a fact of the industry. You do hit end of life with this type of infrastructure, and in the case of Bruce Power, we are able to look at refurbishment, which is great, but it comes back to redundancy. So as of right now, it won't have any direct impact in the supply chain, but it certainly impacts kind of that future potential where we are losing out on that opportunity to produce additional isotopes, but it also opens up a really neat opportunity in the sense that, to Catherine's earlier point around innovation, we have an opportunity to innovate. We have an opportunity to look at these tabletop cyclotrons. We have an opportunity to look at thinking outside the box as it relates to different energy sources or different production technologies or different ways to challenge the status quo. So I think it is par for the course. It is something that certainly happens in the industry. There are reactors that do hit end of life, and we have to plan for that. So I think instead of looking at it as a negative thing necessarily. I think looking at it as an opportunity, but also something that we just need to plan for in our industry is how we're going to get ahead of that risk.
Here's another good audience question I'll throw out. I'll see who wants to take it. I'm not sure whose way to send it, but saying Triumph, MNR, and Bruce are all wonderful Canadian suppliers of starting materials, but can you comment on the potential of made in Canada opportunities to actually create the drugs here for patients? So how do we stop being these ewers of wood and drawers of water? Catherine, I don't know if you want to try that one.
I think, well, so we actually have a partnership with a homegrown company that is a spinoff from McMaster and CPDC. So maybe Karen was actually part of creating this company. So maybe you can talk a little bit about homegrown opportunities, Karen.
Well, we're really quite proud at McMaster that we are sort of home and where things started for both the Center for Probe Development Commercialization as well as Fusion, which was a spin out of the Discovery Group and develops those actinium-based drugs that are targeting. So we have quite a bit of infrastructure and capability in Canada to develop these new drugs because we have the isotopes. So it allows us we have the research capability and we have the infrastructure, and you need to be able to do these long-term studies and then translate that as well to those early clinical trials. So that's an area of excellence at McMaster, but it's an area of excellence that we have in Canada in a few different places, as well as out at UBC and Triumph as well. So, and a number of others as well. But we want to look at this translational ability, but the Center for Probe Development Commercialization absolutely has been an international leader. Fusion is an international leader in developing actinium-based drugs. So I think we have a lot of capacity in research and development in Canada. And I think as we shore up our medical isotopes and we're able to produce more, I think we're going to only do more of that.
And I think that speaks to a little bit of this whole, so how do we do it? And I think it really is through working together, through collaborations. You know, we've been working very hard on developing a well-connected, high-functioning ecosystem related to medical isotopes in Canada. So how do we connect the right people with the right opportunities? How do we connect researchers with funding? You know, how do we get the government to play their part? And we've been working now for a few years on creating a medical isotope ecosystem that brings all of these people together. So researchers from McMaster, from UBC, from Triumph, we have all these great clinicians. We have organizations like Bruce Power, Triumph, Chalk River. If we can work together and build these things together, we'll make more progress. And you know, I think you see in Vancouver there are 2 startup companies that have been funded. Honestly, Fusion broke the ground for them, and the co-location in Vancouver, where they're close to the Triumph cyclotron, is an important factor for them. We've got multiple. What we now have academic collaborations, but I think, you know, if the data looks good in the next year or 2, those are another wave of companies that will start. So it's exciting times here, and also attracting global companies to Canada. So well-funded venture-backed companies from the US and Europe are also now looking to Canada as a place to develop their drugs, because we have organizations like CPDC, like McMaster, like Triumph, and supply from places like Bruce Power. You know, it's an exciting time for Canada.
And let's discuss something that you mentioned in passing. What is the role of government in here? We know that Canada is not always the biggest investor in scientific research. What do they need to do in this field specifically? Maybe Karen, you could kick us off on that one.
Yeah, I think we need to partner with the government to invest in both the research and development and supporting the translation and commercialization of isotopes. I think there's economic benefits for the government we can point to. I think there's benefits for the health of Canadians that we can point to. I think it's such a great industry. Every time we talk to government about this, they get really excited. We just need them to put their money where their mouth is a little bit more. And I think we're getting there. As Catherine alluded, we've been working on this medical isotope ecosystem for a very long time. with the Strategic Innovation Fund, and I think it's looking very promising. So we're excited about that. And one of the great things is us working together as an industry to have a single voice with the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council as well, and allowing us to talk more about the importance of what it is that we do. When we were very diffuse, I think coming together makes our voice a little bit stronger. So we've been working on that end, and so I think we're becoming more effective.
And Stan, I'll ask you the same question. Where would you like to see the government investment? You work on the clinical side more.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on the end user part of this. And really, I think it is the recognition of the potential explosiveness of this therapy, of these imaging modalities, and ensuring that we are meeting what we would consider to be a global standard of care. That we need to ensure that we've got the capacity for delivery, we've got the capacity for imaging, but also we need to ensure that we can continue to be world leaders in clinical trials, that we need the infrastructure put in place so that when new products, new indications, new targets are being developed, that we've got a robust infrastructure that we can then directly put into patient studies so that we can translate what is being done on the physics research and the biology research into the actual medical application.
And I'll send another one Maya's way. This is sort of a slightly different topic, but somebody's asking, there's a certain anti-nuclear sentiment out there. Does that affect this? Is this going to impact, cancer and heart patients if this picks up steam?
I really hope not. I really hope that people are able to look at nuclear in a different light. They're able to see the benefits that having this type of energy production or energy creation from nuclear and the potential that it has to do other things other than just produce electricity. We have such a huge opportunity to support the medical community in a really revolutionary way, and to support them at a capacity that is definitely something that I think they're looking for. So I hope people are more open to just understanding more about nuclear technology and nuclear energy, and open to learning more about the benefits that really come from this type of technology.
And Karen, we talked earlier about these products having a short shelf life, and there's a bunch of audience questions that flow from that. Most of them are to the effect, do you have to produce these products close to where they're going to be administered? Are they only available in big cities? Are they only available near reactors? So some sense of, I guess the big question is, can you get this stuff everywhere? Because there are limitations, practical ones.
Yeah, so logistics are critical. We at McMaster ship isotopes around the world. So one of our big products actually has a 60-day half-life, which is considered very long in nuclear medicine or in radiopharmaceuticals. And so it goes around the world. But we use a lot of commercial flights. And when COVID-19 hit, all the commercial flights ended. So it was very difficult. We were using different flights and we had to kind of pivot and change. But I will say the rule of thumb is you have one half-life to get it from the end to the patient. So, you have 10 days for actinium, you have about 7 days for lutetium, and you have a lot of steps. So we haven't really talked about the full isotope. You start with the enriched isotope, you irradiate to neutrons, then you have to purify that, then you have to send that to a manufacturer to make the radiopharmaceutical drug product in a GMP environment. Then it goes to the hospital. Typically, those are two different places where then we can hand it off to someone like Stan, who would then administer it to a patient. So you have a lot to do in a short amount of time, but over the years, we've become very good at that. So you have about one half-life is the rule of thumb. So for these therapies, we can ship them around the world. We have enough time. It's not a problem. The diagnostic agents, the ones that are in the hours, usually they're centered at different places. So that's where it's harder for us to reach our sort of remote communities and northern communities. It is more challenging for sure.
And then I guess, these radionuclide clinics aren't going to be everywhere, right? They're essentially going to be in big cities.
I think for now, Yes,
Yeah.
but again, really what we're hoping to do is once there's more experience within the community, really branch out to other centers and other locations. Because dependent on what the disease is, some of these therapies, they're done multiple times over a period of weeks or potentially months. And so there is a significant impact on patients and patients' families when they have to travel for these therapies. The other component to this is because patients are being injected with a radioactive source, there are radiation safety protocols that need to be put into play for them. And so, some of the considerations around where this is being done is going to be dependent on having the ability to manage some of those radiation safety issues. But then conversely, it's going to be if you're coming from long distances and we need to ensure the safety to the general public from the patient, that there may be some limitations in terms of where it can be given.
Yeah.
Okay. And Catherine, I have a question that's targeted for you. Someone's asking, what does Triumph need to scale up production of AC-225? And I'm not sure if the questioner has a checkbook ready, but maybe you can let them know what you need to do.
Yes, a checkbook would be ideal. So certainly we've been working on putting together the funding, and we've come up with a variety of partnerships to do so, including one with, as we talked about, Fusion Pharmaceuticals. I think one of the maybe interesting examples of it really kind of takes a village and an ecosystem. We do actually have a new building on the Triumph site called the Institute for Advanced Medical Isotopes. We've been working on this building project for years, but it's almost finished. And, we got funding from 2 different federal government sources, a provincial government source. We actually were the beneficiary of the 2nd largest private donation ever to BC Cancer Foundation. Went into building part of the building. We have funding from the universities. We are looking at private sector partners to be in that space, and part of our vision for that space is to have 2 labs that are really designed to be incubator labs for new startup companies. So I think it's part of this whole, we all have to work together. We're all looking for money to do the things that we need to do. But I think, we've made a lot of progress. There's a lot of excitement building in this space. But certainly, having the government lean in, but really all of us, right? I mean, all of us have to be part of the ecosystem and do our part and to find the funding and focus the funding in the right areas. But it's coming together. But if anyone has a checkbook, please just reach out to me.
I'll take some.
And I'll apologize for jumping all over the place, but we have so many questions. I'm trying to cram in as many as possible. It's a very engaged audience. So I want to send another one Sten's way. Someone's asking, what are your thoughts about Canada's dwindling nuclear medicine residencies? If we have all these promising drugs, are we going to have people to do the work on the ground?
Yeah, what's interesting is I'm actually not a nuclear medicine physician. I'm a radiation oncologist, and so I can speak to the oncology component of it and how there are different models in terms of how this can be delivered. But to the question, I think that all of these residency programs are continuously evolving, and there's look at dual certification with radiology and nuclear medicine, which probably as the field becomes more dynamic, you're going to get more people attracted to it. So, it's actually interesting that I think this time of growth is really going to be a time of increased interest in this therapy and for theranostics, and not just looking at the diagnostic component, but really moving into therapeutic. And so, in fact, I think this may be an opportunity to expand that.
And another question, going back to the government role, people are wondering, how aware, how educated are decision makers provincially, federally on these issues? Do they know enough stuff that they're going to invest in this? Karen, what do you think? Is there the knowledge there of how important this is?
We've been working really hard on that, and it's not a simple thing to explain. It is very exciting, and when we can show our pictures, it's really great. But I think we've all really come together and helping to communicate that. And one of the areas, other than funding, that I think the government could really help us is in some policy to help us with transportation, our regulatory pathways, helping look at clinical trial data that's occurring in other jurisdictions, and be able to sort of leverage some information and work more collaboratively internationally. I think that would really help us a lot. which is not financial.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. So the patient image that we showed came out of German studies. And so in Germany, they have a system where it's very easy for researchers to try new experimental treatments. And so, basically, if a doctor and a patient confer and agree, and they've tried kind of the standard of care, they can try really very innovative treatments with very little paperwork and bureaucracy. And so that was really what started all the excitement about lutetium and actinium. People saw these scans coming out of these German researchers' labs. And it was, obviously they're very exciting. There have now been hundreds of patients that have been treated successfully with this treatment. And I think a lot of that was, why Novartis ended up spending $2 billion to acquire that PSMA technology that you saw at work in the photo. So, if Canada could have a more friendly regulatory environment that allowed researchers to be innovative and quickly innovative, that could really help Canada move quickly ahead.
Yeah, I would agree, Catherine. And I think one of the things that would be really great for our biotech companies and those that are coming in as well would be able to allow them to access and have access to data to be able to get those clinical trials pushed through in Canada. We want to keep our Canadian technology in Canada as well, and not lose all of those to other places like the US or even over in Europe, they're very advanced in their approach.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on that piece, Karen, I think there's certainly an opportunity, just circling back to that original question around production within Canada. I think that is a gap right now. I think there's an opportunity for manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies to come in to produce the nuclear medicine within Canada. I know that's something that Bruce Power is really keen on. For transparency's sake, we are shipping it to a partner outside of Canada, but being close to our reactors and being able to manufacture those radiopharmaceuticals within Canada, there's certainly an opportunity there, and we would certainly welcome that. So I know from an opportunity perspective, if there's anyone in the audience who is in the radiopharmaceutical business or within the manufacturing business, that's certainly an opportunity that we would welcome, also from an ecosystem standpoint.
We as an ecosystem in this industry, it's really supported quite broadly. We have a lot of industry in this area that are working in it. And because we have a strong nuclear power history, we have a strong nuclear supply chain. So we've had a lot of really great growing companies. One that comes to mind is Promation, who is really experts in automation. And when they apply those techniques to how you're going to process your isotopes coming out of these in mass amounts out of the power plants, it's really impressive. So I think there's a lot of moving around and pivoting for our nuclear industry and leveraging excellence that we already have in order to scale up.
I think that's a good point. I mean, I think, we've talked about it amongst ourselves, that Canada punches above its weight in this nuclear side. We are a small company on the global landscape, but we really do have an outsized impact on this nuclear piece. And I think it's something that we can leverage our past, our strengths, our infrastructure, our collaborative networks to really position ourselves well as we move into the future. I think we have strong companies that have been doing this for decades very successfully, Nordion, BWXT, and now with the reactor folks pulling into the mix, Chalk River, then CNL folks. Again, we're all kind of, it's an exciting time, and we're drawing major players into this piece that are kind of new to it, but they bring expertise and infrastructure into the mix.
Great, thanks. I want to mention I'm back. I had a little technical glitch there. I think I was cursed by saying we don't have problems anymore at the outset. But thanks to the panelists for speaking among themselves while I was there, and I'm going to let you continue, Karen. Just want people to know I've not died.
No, I was just saying one of the great things about having such a strong nuclear supply chain and having them really focus in on medical isotopes, as our power plants have been involved in the production of isotopes, is they really bring a fresh perspective and innovative look at an industry that is evolving. So I think some of the automation side, and I think of Kinetrix and Isogen and these companies that are going to be looking at this in new ways and on a grand scale, it's going to really provide a lot of stability to the supply chain. And, you know, there's a lot of interest in a lot of companies that are coming out of Canada with new technology. There's, you know, Point Biopharma, whom we haven't mentioned. They're doing fabulous and really interesting work and lots of new technology and innovation. Kinetrix, ABK has got new treatment options for different liver cancer. Like there's lots happening in Canada. We could spend a whole time just talking about the companies involved, but it's exciting.
And if you could continue on that, Karen, I wondered, you know, someone's asking, what are the biotech opportunities in theranostic specifically? Is that something you can expand on a bit?
Yeah, I was kind of leading that way, that there's a lot of opportunities in order to sort of either partner with your research institutions because we have this infrastructure. So that's one of the things that has come out of, you know, McMaster with our research capability. We do a lot of partnerships and foster that early research in order to translate it. Because this is such a highly regulated industry, both on the nuclear side, but also in Health Canada, it requires a really unique set of infrastructure, and being able to go right from the beginning to the end is rare, but we have a few places that we're able to do that in Canada. And so I think I would point to a lot of biotech industry, and I think a lot of the way that we're setting up the medical isotope ecosystem, and maybe Catherine could jump in and talk about that more, but when we're looking at the medical isotope ecosystem, one of the things that we want to do is foster new biotech and foster innovation and translational work.
Yeah, sorry, Catherine, I cut you off there.
Oh, no problem. So I think that's exactly it. How do we build this ecosystem so that, you know, there are startup companies out there that have great technologies, but getting a lab that is certified to do the kind of radioactive work that needs to be done is not necessarily cheap or quick. So, you know, could we have a lab that's accessible for multiple companies to share to advance their technologies? Could we provide more of those services by working together? So I think that's part of it. And then also providing some seed funding to help really get a few critical pieces of proof of concept data to know whether there's something really there or not. You know, if there's nothing there, then move on to the next opportunity. If there is something there, then how do we focus more resources and energy to advance that idea as quickly as possible to, you know, final R&D? But we do have the pieces of taking something from an idea in a researcher's head to a drug that you can give to a patient in a clinic.
I think we would be remiss also to ignore that our universities are doing remarkable work in terms of the biology and the basic science.
Yeah.
And so as we are identifying better targets or more accurate targets, then, you know, we need to find a way to also engage that basic work into this model. And so this is going to get much bigger as we get better understanding of the biology and better understanding of the delivery. And so I think the universities and that basic science component is also such an invaluable part of this ecosystem which is being discussed.
That's exactly where I was going, Sten. I was going to say, you know, at MAC, we are investing in new faculty in this area and an institute, and looking at developing a medical isotope institute that allows this area to translate. Because we have those core to clinic capabilities on campus, it is a place where we want to foster that basic science to look at whether those targets and those targeting agents are useful and if they're worth, you know, taking to the next step. So we're really looking to invest and expand in that space. And so there'll be more about that in the next few months.
We only have a few minutes left, so I want to ask you sort of a forward-looking question to wrap up. You know, I've heard over and over the words innovation, promise, opportunity. So I want you to put on your, look into your crystal balls, look 10 years ahead. What's this industry going to look like? What's cancer treatment going to look like? What's production going to look like? Maybe I'll start with you, Maya. How are things going to be different 10 years from now?
It's really interesting that you started with me, because I think we're kind of the last component of the train here. We really bring up the caboose, I guess, so to speak, in the sense that we really want to follow where the innovation is going, and we really want to be able to support that from a production standpoint. So once you're seeing the research go through its various cycles and its various trials, we want to be able to support the capacity that is needed to support these radiopharmaceuticals going forward. So that's really where I see Bruce Power being able to provide that, is just that redundancy, that capacity, that reliability and supply, and also being able to provide a bit of flexibility as it relates to the type of isotopes that we're able to provide.
And Catherine, as another supplier, producer, where do you see things being at Triumph in 10 years?
I hope that we are literally making enough doses for tens of thousands of patients around the world who currently don't have any hope left. And I think, I mean, in my family, my father died of cancer. My uncle is fighting prostate cancer right now. So to be able to offer a treatment that would help people like that, I think is really important, and it'll put us on the map. I mean, if we do that, it will create jobs, it will create opportunity, it will create supply chain, it will create a sustainable ecosystem. But I mean, the core of it is like, can we really make a difference in these people's lives around the world?
And Stan, I'll throw that question to you. In 10 years, how is patient treatment going to be different if things work out the way you'd like?
So I think that we're moving into a precision oncology era. And that's kind of a catch-all term that we're using, where we're able to individualize patient treatment dependent on their molecular and imaging features. And so what I suspect is going to happen in the future is, with better biology and better imaging, we're going to be able to streamline patients to different therapies, which we would expect their response rates to be improved, whether that be continuing with traditional therapies like surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, moving to immunotherapy, targeted therapy, and with radioisotope therapy moving into this sphere as another treatment option. So I really think that we're moving past the one-size-fits-all into the individual patient at that time therapy. And that's what's exciting about this.
Right. Karen, I'll give you the last word. Give us the future in a nutshell.
I really think this is a really exciting space to be working in. I think in 10 years, we will have new treatments for patients for cancers that don't have any treatments right now. That I'm really hoping that by investing in the research and the whole supply chain from beginning to end, that we're going to have attract some really smart young faculty members and biologists that are going to think about this creatively and innovate, so that these patients that don't have good options right now will have great options and personalized medicine.
Great, wonderful. Thank you to the panelists for this really dynamic discussion, for filling in the holes when I took a little break there. That was great. You're very fast on your feet. So I want to thank each of you individually: Maya Ingram from Bruce Power, Catherine Hayashi from Triumph, Karen Stevenson, McMaster, and Sten Meyerhog from Sunnybrook. Thank you for being there. On behalf of the Globe and Mail, I want to thank especially everyone in the audience. There's an amazing amount of questions. I've done a lot of these events. I've never seen so many questions. Sorry for those of you I didn't get to, but I tried to cram as many in as possible. I want to thank today's sponsors, the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council and Bruce Power, of course, for making this possible. Looks like there's a lot of interest in this topic. We might have to do another one. So again, thank you to the audience. We're going to post a link to the recorded webcast in 2 weeks. So if your friends and family regret not being there, you can give them a copy. They can listen in, or you can review some of the technicalities and study. So thank you again, everyone. Stay safe, get vaccinated, and we'll see you at the next Globe event.